Hi everyone.
Hi, everyone.
Your complex is a conflict of instincts. So this is an unusual video and there's an awful lot in it if you can unpack it. It's absolutely densely packed with information which is distilled out from our 46 years of frontline clinical experience. So there's an awful lot to learn from this if you allow yourself to. So we hope you enjoy it
We do.
and we'll see you next time.
And we'll see you soon.
Cheers. Take care. Yeah, so for historical relevance, it's Freud who emphasized instinct. And Freud has been so maligned now, and pop Jungianism certainly has distanced itself from him, that it's as if you can only think in terms of archetypes if you go beyond the ego. And modern Jungians don't even really consider complexes effectively at all. So because they lose that fundamental understanding of what instinct actually is, then everything downstream of that is misrepresented and misunderstood. That's within the psychodynamic field. Within the so-called humanistic and transpersonal psychology field, it's a similar thing. Freud's comprehensively rejected, so is biology, therefore so is instincts. The behavioral and cognitive schools pay lip service to things like instinct, but they don't go into anything like enough detail. So the popular perception is that Freud and instincts bad, Jung is good. The transpersonal, a lot of people think transpersonal is way beyond Jung. It's certainly inflated beyond him. And the CBT and humanistic, in this collapse sense, I mean Rogerian style models are also very, very far from biology. So they can't have a unified field approach. And we've been pushing Freud, Adler and Jung right the way along because of the historical significance of those three in relationship to one another, and the fact that Jung himself said that you know the first two before you get anywhere near him. But now that we've managed to propagate an understanding of just how powerful instincts are and how important they are, it's affecting people rather dramatically. Even today, I have several emails and DMs and the like from people who have overnight had their lives turned around by understanding what they're actually up against. So to understand what a conflict of instincts is, then we need to hold in mind Freud without collapsing into him for all the reasons that we've said in the past about that brings its own problems, but also measure that against the compensation that's come through neuropsychoanalysis, where they're mainly interested only in Panksappian drives as the modern manifestation of the id. And their solution always is to collapse into different ways of utilizing Panksappian drives. And they don't really get meta instincts at all. And yet it's the meta instincts as a scenario for Panksepp that makes Panksepp work efficiently. And that's what's coming through from people that are communicating with us. So when we get round to starting on the discussion for that, then it's the primacy of the ancestral psyche that we're really going to look at, and the fact that that can get into conflict itself, and how that happens and how that can manifest in people's lives. So that's probably a first summary at this point. Do you feel, Paul, anything to add to that?
Well, I think we'll probably come on to it when we were going to discuss probably in some detail the relevance of Panksepian and meta instincts in the lives of women, but also to how they affect men, because of
Yeah.
course women are in relationship to men, and families as well. The family context as a whole, and how these things operate largely. Unconsciously, I think for women, certainly women who have been influenced by all the various iterations of feminism, their perspective tends to be very much a top-down psychosocial perspective of behavior, and there's little to none, I would say actually none. There's no understanding of instincts and the nature of instincts and just how powerful they can be. And because of that, they never reach a a solution or a resolution. So I think at some point it'd be good to come on to that as well.
Yeah. Yeah, so it's a very broad field, and
It is.
what we're saying basically is that you can't book instinct; it will never go away.
No.
But if we're not conscious enough to understand how powerful it is as a motivation and a direction for our life, then we are going to be victims to it, particularly by collapse into the ego.
Yeah.
And a lot of our work is with complexes, and we've said this so many times. And we do think that's where the art of psychotherapy properly belongs. But complexes, Jung said, form on an archetypal base. And we would say that they operate superpositioned with meta instincts and with Panksappian instincts. And that's a nuance which goes beyond this idea that complexes simply grow out of an archetypal base. Because archetypes themselves, and I keep emphasizing this because it gets lost in the mythopoetic aspects of Jung. Jung says in Collective Works, Volume 8, that the archetypes are the self-portrait of the instincts, and the instincts understanding their apperception, their consciousness of themselves. So they are downstream of instincts. So what is emitted, if you like, by meta-instincts as archetypes are representations that then superposition into culture, into myth, religion, folk tales, and the usual stuff that Jungians like to preoccupy themselves with. But that's not the base. That's not the baseline register. The baseline register is within the field of meta instincts as they connect to the genome. But the genome itself is also innervated with other fields. The one that we call the Platonic field, for example. And so in that sense, it's the lowest psychological register that we can normally experience, the meta instincts, normally experienced. Now, we would say you can go beyond that, and you guys know this. There are methods of going beyond the meta instincts, but that takes a lot of discipline and a lot of work. Working at the meta instinctive level is the absolute and essential baseline for organizing everything within the psyche that's downstream of them, and that pretty much is everything that we normally experience. So when instincts get into conflict, and we are unconscious not only of the instincts but of the conflict at that level, then complexes immediately fill the gap, and then we start to suffer. So that's why they're as important as they are. Would anybody like to offer a prompt for a discussion around this? Hi, Ben.
Go ahead, Jess. Jess, she put her hands up first. So.
Okay.
Yeah, thanks. Hi.
Hi, Jess.
Hello. In the recent seminar, and you put it in the complex video, the recent video about complexes, you said that instincts and complexes are kind of the same thing. And I've been thinking about that. Like, is it helpful to think of it in the way that instincts are like the complexes of the ancestral psyche, in a way?
Yes. Yeah.
And yeah, I found that quite helpful to understand, like, that because the way you feel complexes and instincts, it's very difficult to differentiate in any given moment the emotion that's coming from either one, really, especially if it's a strong emotion. Yeah, I guess that's all I had to say.
Yeah, that's a great point, and you've articulated it so very well, Jess. If we go back a little and say that the sort of traditional Jungian view is the complexes form on an archetypal base or around an archetypal nucleus, that doesn't tell us how they interact, because there's a tendency to split them off. And you've immediately pointed out that our approach is that they are the same thing. And what joins them is superpositioning. So they share they share a field of information and representation that means that they're both present at the same time. But there is the capacity within that relationship for complexes to hijack instinct and redirect its energy and its representation. The representation being to the ego, but also the distribution of instinctive pressure into symptoms, which at that point remains or is appropriated to the extended field of the complex. So what Freud was experiencing as hysteria, as he referred to it at the time, the psychosomatic kind of representation, that is instinct and the complex simultaneously, producing a field of distributed representation that the ego doesn't understand. It's literally unconscious of what is happening, but it feels the distress. The distress originates, though, further upstream or back upstream from the ego, and that can originate solely at the level of instincts where they get into conflict with one another for the available drive pressure and time-release genomic expression. But then the complexes too, and the complexes form as a reaction to instinctive pressure as the ego receives it. But once the complex achieves autonomy, it's in a position then, as we said last time, to generate an internal mirage of the ego that is actually the complex. So the compensations that move up from the genome and originate within a representation of a meta instinct, that is to say a solution, an anticipated solution, all of that is moved towards the complex rather than to the ego itself. And that means then that the complex can filter what it allows through, and generally what it allows through is negative affect, drive state, agitation, and distribution. And whereas none of those three things suits the health of the ego, it suits the complex to do that, because an autonomous complex defaults to its own self-maintenance. And that's really the insight that Janet gifted to all of us, including to Jung, that once it partitions itself, the ego, and gives over responsibility for dealing with something it finds unpleasant, then that which is partitioned acts, as Janet called, a subnuclei of consciousness, and that autonomy allows it to mess up all sorts of things, and including over time any compensation that comes up from the genome through gene expression, through homeostasis, in other words, because the complex is ideally placed to interfere with that. And if we take the concept of psychological immunity, so homeostasis has a psychological immune aspect to its functioning. It should be clearing up things like this. But in relationship to the adaptation of the ego, if the complex gets in the way by masquerading, in other words, projecting internally a mirage of the ego, then there's no discrimination. It's just that it's very active. So as the signal from the complex increases, then homeostasis says that is the ego, and it moves the compensation. The compensation is distorted and it becomes symptoms which justify the complex to the ego. And then the ego it's stuck. It just doesn't know what's going on.
Which is actually exactly the same as things happen in the body with respect to the immune system, because if the immune system doesn't recognize that which is other, that allows, the virus, the antigen, whatever it is, to do its work, to do its damage. So that ability of the ego to recognize that there is something that is operating that is not in its interest or in the interest of the organism as a whole is obviously not a good situation to be in. It's not good for homeostasis, but there is definitely a direct analogy there with how things operate in the body, because of course, as well as superpositioning. So you would expect that to be the same in a way.
Yes, you would, because the mechanism as such at a physiological level is highly conserved and it works.
Yes, it does.
So the fact that it works will be extended and then as a principle. So when it comes into psychological immunity, then as you say, you're going to see the same kind of Sheldrakean pattern because it works at other levels.
Yeah. There's, as you say, there's an inherited aspect to it.
There's an inherited
As well.
aspect to it. Plus complexes are somatic as well as psychological. So there's an innate acceptance then within the economy of the field of a human being to react to psychological immune issues in the same way it reacts to psychobiological or
Yeah.
purely physiological immune responses.
Yeah.
So the complexity comes about for the ego insofar as the ego doesn't understand what's going on, because unfortunately the ego collapses into itself. And it experiences psychology as being itself. But the psychology that extends beyond this has been misattributed by most of the, in fact, all of the, in our view, psychodynamic schools as being the unconscious. And yet so many advances have been made, for example, through Ernest Rossi's work to do with mind-body trance states and conversions of information, that it is far from unconscious. It is differently conscious. It is non-ego conscious rather than unconscious. And as Jung himself hinted, in fact, he said it openly, instincts are conscious. They have a reflexivity, which means they can generate an image of themselves, which functions semi-separately to them. And that's exactly what you were saying, that archetypes and instincts are like complexes at the level at which they operate. And as they move downstream, they acquire superpositioning with other systems like complexes. Of course, the information which is not in the ego, but is upstream of it, is under drive pressure to superposition itself with the ego, because the ego is the interface with the outside world. So compensations start outside of the ego and then are received in the form of metaqualia representations, intuitions, sensations, that is to say, internal images, body representations, affects, emotions, because emotion is to carry away with instinct towards the ego and its consciousness. And then lastly, cognition. And our cognition is developmental. It comes online relatively late in development. As children reach adolescence, it starts to distill. It's not until adulthood is firmly achieved that we actually see a differentiated cognition in people. Children know they are affective, they are also intuitive, and they communicate and relate internally and externally through sensory representations as well, primarily. Cognition is like an adult thing, and kids know that, they know it instinctively, literally. And they have to live their life that way and then develop cognition at the level of the ego as development unfolds. However, once we've got cognition, there's a tendency to collapse into it. And that's okay sometimes. Cognition does work very well unto itself when it's abstracted away from consciousness of anything else, because it's got a limited carrying capacity. And all the other stuff goes on in the background and should ideally be regulated in the background. But when cognition fails, there's nothing for it to go to judge itself. The inner world is chaos. The outer world likewise is chaotic and unpredictable. But then cognition, because it always collapses more and more into itself, and then you get the typical neurosis. And then the other metaqualia are received as symptoms. It's, again, Jung with his poetic language, it's so attractive and seducing. I mean, when he said, for example, the gods no longer populate Olympus, but they turn up in the doctor's consulting room as interesting symptoms. So in other words, everything that is not cognition, if it can't get through because the ego collapses around that, but it fails, they then have to turn up in the body as compensations in the form of symptoms. Again, he was so right, but he didn't develop that. If he did develop that then so much more would have been achieved, we feel, don't we, decades and decades ago. But Jung has taken the mythopoetic representation as if it's everything, but at the same time cognitively collapsed around the representation. That's a mistake. The representation is a portal, it's a doorway for us to go beyond it. But once we make it a kind of an apotheosis, a thing in and of itself, the symbol that Jungians like to go on about, then we're trapped by it. And all the cognition seems to be able to do then is to make more versions, more iterations of it. So it looks for analogues and says, well, in this myth that happened, and in that fairy tale that happened, and in this other religion something else is considered. But it's not something else, it's the same thing, and it's laterally distributed. So they're locked within level. Whereas the whole point of the compensation, as Jung understood it, would be to be able to receive what it stands for. But if we look inwardly and expect the non-ego to be like the ego, all we're going to do is internally project an image of ourselves and our limitations, which is then reflected back to us. So we're stuck. And that's the typical state people who suffer from neurosis are in. And it's completely independent of education or intelligence, or even of learning. It's a deep structure, ancestral, and indeed evolutionary consequence of simply being human.
So if someone's suffering in that way, the last thing you want to do is to add more cognition.
Yes.
With in effect, that's what happens. In reality, that tends to be what people receive.
Yeah. I mean, you can get short-term relief by offering a different way of framing an outcome and making a prediction that's positive for a future event. This is basic CBT. It's also found in neuropsychoanalysis. The problem with that, though, is that it does not remove primary instinctive pressure. If the genome finds the slightest suggestion of repression, suppression, displacements, an extension of fantasy as a replacement for adaptation, it will simply boil up again and then come again back for us. And that explains the failure rate in CBT. In the mid to long term, it fails. It's as if the emphasis on cognition simply didn't take deeply enough for there to be a proper change. And the attitude that CBT has towards emotion as being irrational, that means they can't receive it. So that doesn't leave many options for a response from the field other than to create further disturbance. And when someone's been processed through CBT and accepted it on the basis of suggestion initially, and then it fails, they'll have no more confidence at all in a cognitive-based approach. They will know that it will not, because this is what's happened to them, that it won't work. But at the same time, they've been encouraged to think of emotion and imagery and intuition as all being irrational and negative. So they get cut off then from the capacity to self-heal. And that's probably 95% of the people that we've ever worked with. The collapse around the ego is the problem. But the liberation they feel when they understand that they are a field of different kinds of consciousness that want to get along. The psyche doesn't want to be in conflict. And that's another argument with the Jungians who want to make a fight out of everything. No homeostatic system which is fighting itself will ever be optimal in terms of its adaptation. In fact, it will grind itself down. It's contra naturam to fight against something which should heal itself from within. And there's great relief in appreciating that, isn't there? So we could, I don't need to fight. I just need to be open and receive. There's a great point that, Jess. Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks.
Thanks,
Thank
Jess.
you, Jeff.
Thank you.
Hi, John.
Hi, Steve. Hi, Briley. I have a question about what you said about what Jung told when people went to the doctor and then arise like somatic symptoms.
Yeah.
In our world and in what in the physical therapy work, a lot of people came with somatic symptoms. Some of the lesions, I think, are structural, but also superpositioned. But a lot of chronic pain patients have somatic symptoms, are psychosomatic symptoms. And we, I think, tend to, or a lot of people tend to treat these patients like in a collapsed way with different techniques, but having in account the structure and the pain that is emitting that somatic symptom. And a lot of times that type of pain disappears. But my question is, and I see also that when a pain disappears in one place, maybe can appear in another place, and that's normal and makes sense. But my question is, if a symptom, a physical symptom, disappears completely in a patient using a collapse model, can cognition then start to have different kind of another representations, or more neurosis, or bigger drive state, or what's your opinion on that?
Do you know, John, that's so well articulated, and it's so helpful coming from your current professional background, because being a physical therapist, you know how these things, this is your daily experience. So it's like, that is really, really helpful. For some people, the removal of physical pain that's structural will be enough to make a change at a psychological level, to bring about a homeostatic change that removes other things. So you can actually use a body work approach to change psychology. This is entirely possible. There are, of course, other situations that you've mentioned just before, where it moves, it simply moves, or you, or a professional in your, with your background, may remove the structural aspects, but the psychological aspect will shift representation. It will re-innovate a place, for example, structurally, or it may even be organically, physical organic symptoms. And that, I guess, must be frustrating for people in physical therapy, physical therapists, because it's as if the psychology is moving things around in a way that doesn't make sense at a physical level. So it's elusive, and that's the key. Or at that time, we know for sure the complexes are doing it. They are moving everything around. The informational field representation is changing. If complexes do that, then not only are they doing it for themselves, they're doing it because something else is in conflict beyond them. And this is the bit that's missed very, very often, and why Paul and I thought we should emphasize this for today, is that when instincts get into conflict, then that conflict will start to, first of all, reduce the adaptability of the ego. That's the first thing the ego will know. And it'll notice it because it will get symptoms that suggest a complex exists, even if it already doesn't. Which will be, there'll be a lack of motivation, there'll be gaps in consciousness, what's going on, absences, if you like. And then in an attempt to understand that, a complex splits off. And how that happens with respect to the ego is that it wonders cognitively what is going on now. And in that moment, Jeanne, if you like, kicks in, and then something drops out of the ego, moves to one side, and it has a look. And at that point, if we don't catch what we've just done, if we don't connect to say, I've literally sent something off to find out what's going on away from me, I've let it go, I've let it escape, then we haven't realized that we have dissociated. If we realize we've dissociated, that's a good thing. And that comes about through training in meditative practices or Western methods like the right kind of hypnosis. Because then we can split something off, we know we're doing it, and as it's split off, it takes our intentionality with it consciously. So the consciousness of the part which is separated is now congruent with the ego, because we've kept hold of it. We've decided, I direct this inwardly to receive an answer that I can understand. That's completely different from splitting off and then losing it. It's gone. So why do things split off and they're gone? What's the adaptive advantage? In most cases, probably it works. We're able in the moment to deal with something because something else is split off and is going to do that without depleting our energy in the moment. The problem, though, is that if we forget that we did that, with the passage of time and the more time that elapses, the easier it is for the complex to escape. Then the complex will escape and it will start to mess around with homeostasis. And what it will feed off is drive pressure, instinctive drive pressure. That's its metabolism. But then when it moves back towards the ego, if it becomes an ego identified with complex, it has to get in there and it will go in there using the drive pressure as fuel to break in. And at that point, it's very analogous, isn't it, to a viral or parasitical model, because once it's in there,
There's no distinction made, is there? Well, as you say, a virus gets into the cell, into the nucleus of the cell, it becomes one unified thing, entity. And same is true psychologically.
Yeah. And we used to say to people, didn't we? We used to use the viral metaphor, and it's going back to the 80s, we'd say to people, it's as if you are forced to repeat, to replicate, to reproduce, and to identify with something that is not you. It started off as being you, part of you when you divided, but then it acquired other things and it became interested only in itself.
Yeah.
So the viral metaphor, and it is a metaphor, is a very useful one to generate a model of, if that's what happened. In that moment, I lost it. I didn't want to think about it, and I let it go. So training in proper approaches to deal with the immediacy of consciousness and how we receive instinct is an advanced form of self-regulation that the ego is participating within. But if the ego says, no, I don't want to know, this is so unpleasant, I'm not thinking about it, as an act of will, at the moment it says, I am not thinking about it, that equals suppression. When it can't remember, that equals repression. And repression is total freedom for the complex to act autonomously. So suppose then there's a situation where a complex is split off and we've forgotten it's repressed, but the effect downstream of that is a whole field of distributed symptoms psychologically, as the ego experiences psychology within our body and then within our behavior. What we have to do is utilize dissociation again to separate off the symptoms that the ego is feeling from the ego. So the ego is now isolated and comfortable, and it can experience a different state. And at that point, we build ego strength, and then we go after, if you like, gently, of course, the complex itself and its configuration in all of these different states. What will happen, and this is very important to understand, is, and people have a fear of this because there is an awareness that it could go wrong. It doesn't when people are properly guided. But if I go chasing this thing that I've been afraid of, I'm going to feel terrible. That's exactly what a complex will agree with if we say it. But if we say, I'm going to isolate myself so it can't impact me, it can't bond with me, but I can perceive it through intuition on the inside. The intuition then generates an image, which is ego strengthening, of separation. Then we feel, affect better, then we can think differently in that order. So we need to utilize intuition to grasp the wider field with non-attachment to those aspects of our suffering that a complex is utilizing, so it can't get at us. Then we can change the representation, invite agreement from homeostasis with the new image that we've generated, and then we can think and feel differently at the level of the ego outside of the trance state. When we achieve that, homeostasis sees the difference between the ego and the formerly identified with complex. So then it can push gently, and what we need to do can unpack into the ego, and we feel better for that. Whereas before, the complex would insinuate, if you try that, you will feel fucking shit. You will be in a terrible state. Your body will be full of pain, or organic dysfunction. Your psychology will break down. You can't remember. You can't think straight. You can't relate. It will insinuate all of that. And if the ego agrees with it, it will replicate the suggestion. This is the viral DNA. It will agree with it and will reproduce it. The good thing, though, about that is that although it's awful, it has to be continually reinforced by the complex. It can't just leave something there. It's got to keep at it. It's got to maintain that position. So the ego is depleted and identifies with the neurosis. And that's why it's so quick to turn people around when they're suffering if they do the right thing, because the complex has limited resources. Initially, its own, which is very small, then the ego, which is bigger than the complex, and then beyond that, the other resources it will try to utilize are instincts, and anything that is homeostatic is delivered from the genome via instincts to attempt to compensate. So they're the three levels that it has available to it: its own intrinsic energy and resources, the ego, then the wider instinctive and genomic field. If we don't allow that to happen, if we disagree with the attempt for the complex to do it, the complex cannot function. It will break down. So the quickest way of doing that is to, through dissociation, access meta instincts. But if the meta instincts themselves are in conflict because we have made an adaptive mistake, then how we relate to those instincts, that is in and of itself decisive, and that's what we were, ultimately intending to discuss today.
Yeah. Yes. I think from what you said about the positive utilization of trance state, it's really important to bear in mind that if you don't use trance states and dissociation in a controlled way, that the consequences that the complex insinuates will happen are more likely to kick in than if you don't use trance states. So it's going to want you to breathe that you shouldn't go there, as you say, and use those methods. But actually, you're more likely to get a kickback from complexes if you don't do it. So as you say, the point at which dissociation occurs in any given situation, and the ego gets some temporary respite, if you like, from feeling a bit more comfortable, you can bet your bottom dollar the back pressure that's created from either suppression or repression will return in some form if you don't deal with it. So it's actually the opposite of what the complex will insinuate. It will insinuate you'll feel better if you don't do anything about it. But it's the obverse of that, which is what you're emphasizing, isn't it?
Thank
so
you.
you can become, good at it as well. You can get really good at doing it. That's the point.
That's brilliant. That's so important. When you practice and entrain the capacity to dissociate sufficiently, you can put yourself in a parallel state which is separate to the conflict that you've been suffering from. At a minimum, this is a minimum, but it's adaptive. So it will be as if the conflict is still there, but you're not feeling it. And it also does not move into other states. It doesn't somaticize and it doesn't become behavioral or interpersonal. It's actually in stasis.
That's important because that links with what John is saying about symptom substitution
as
well. You don't allow it to become more of a problem and to, occupy different systems. You can keep it where it is and deal with it, locate it and deal with it within level.
Within level. This is all about conscious partitioning, whereas Jallet was concerned about unconscious, or you said subconscious, same thing. Partitioning, where the ego doesn't realize that it's split. When we know, that's good. We stop things happening downstream. When things have happened, all we need to do is to entrain a dissociation to be able to bring about the healing effects. So it's not that everything is lost. Far from it. Dissociation and representation, in that order. First of all, close down, shut off, switch off, and then let the representations come at a distance with non-attachment, and you can deal with them.
Yeah.
So that's important.
It's very important because it's about the active engagement with them. I mean, when we suppress or repress complexes, we have a kind of a passive relationship to them. And like I say, we may feel temporarily better because of the mechanism of dissociation, but you can bet your life that because of instincts, that there will be at some point we'll experience the back pressure from instincts.
Yeah.
There's far better to have a method, an active way of dealing with them. And as you say, it doesn't have to be, necessarily an Eastern meditative practice. It doesn't
No.
have to be that at all. We just have to understand what dissociation is,
Yeah.
and how we can use representation in order to get our homeostasis back.
Yeah.
And it's like a lot of things in life, isn't it? There's an awful lot of smoke and mirrors really around these topics, these subjects.
Yeah.
But at root, the actual mechanisms for doing it are very simple,
Very
are very
simple, yeah.
straightforward and effective.
Well, to give an in-the-moment example of something that could be taken as a signal, obviously can't see John at the moment, but he's been moving back and forward at quite a rate of speed, haven't you, John? Yeah, he's doing it there. So there's some connection between movement and a state, which will be superposition between what you're aware of the state, you being the ego, and what you're not aware of that state, which is occurring simultaneously. So what any of us can do is, if we catch ourselves doing that, we can say there is this parallel state to my immediate awareness, which is extended. And if I can access that by repeating the movement, it is then a true idiomotor phenomenon. It's not like where we've induced formal hypnosis, formal hypnotic trance state, and then there is an idiomotor. It's a natural idiomotor phenomenon, which is accompanying other things. So we go back into it and we say, well, what happens when I do that? If I open myself up to receiving a series of images, some representations are going to come through. Because intuition will organize the images if you're passive about it. If you generate an image and say, I've done this consciously, that's not intuition. If you're open, intuition will deliver an image. Once you've got that, you can do three things actually. The first one, which is pointless, you can ignore it. The second one is you engage only with the image, which will take you so far. And the best one ultimately is what is beyond the image. In order to get beyond it, we have to internally signal, I have received this. Thank you. But I don't fully understand it yet. I would like to understand some more. And when you're ready, you're speaking internally. When you're ready, I would like to receive another image that allows me to go a little deeper into my understanding. And however you want to phrase that, that's subjective to any of us, will determine what the response is going to be. But we must have patience and say, I received a signal. I'd like to see it as you choose to allow me to see it, and then perhaps go beyond it. You immediately increase consciousness because you're understanding different kinds of representation. And this isn't you, John, but just suppose that movement backwards and forwards actually was a symptom of some kind, adopting a frequency of representation that was non-cognitive. That then could be, I am the complex, here I am, I'm not going to be put off by this. I'm going to wait till you shut the fuck up and then I'm going to jump right in. It could be. If you engage with it, you take that away from the complex. Now, alternatively, it might be something positive that's saying, I'm here. I want to come out. This is the moment for me to explain to you, the ego, through a representation, that this is the pathway for healing. And we have to have the ego strength to say, it does not matter which of those alternatives it is, I will receive and understand as far as I can in the moment what that is. That shows respect for homeostasis. It also goes beyond simple homeostasis into any conflict, for example, that may be at a meta-instinctive level or even a Pankseppian level. Because then both of them have the opportunity to be, both poles of the instinctive conflict will have the opportunity to be heard. That's important as well. If instincts are in conflict, then they're in conflict because they want to be satisfied. And if it's like, it's either you or it's me, who's going to be satisfied, and we're going to fight over this, that's not good for them. It's not good for the instincts. We can satisfy all of them in good time. No need for any conflict at all. So utilizing that cognitive conscious language patterning that you hold within the ego, within your frontal lobes, and then send it back and then wait, then you're not yet penetrating into the response that you will receive, but you're saying, I am open to receive. That will take a lot of instinctive pressure away. So sorry to point that out, John, but it was so very obvious, yeah. Okay, in absence of John commenting further, other than perhaps rocking backwards and forwards a little, would anybody like to develop any of these points forward or ask any questions? Feel free.
I have the tendency to,
John's
yes,
nodding away.
but this chair, the chair that I have is like very, is balance is a lot. So I think that when I move the head, I'm moving myself. So
You are indeed, yeah.
I rewatch and we'll see.
It's this, remember, that is sprung in a way with a way to amplify a signal which already exists. So, since if there is an opportunity to amplify a signal, then you'll find that both complexes and homeostasis will do that. They will say, I mean, I often do it. I'm often swinging around. It's not just because I'm uncomfortable. It's because something wants to express itself or get.
But you have a chair that moves.
I have a chair that moves.
John has it. Is sitting on a rigid chair, I think, is what he
Is that what he said?
I think he.
No, it's rigid, but it's like one. It doesn't have like the leg down here, so it moves a little bit.
Yeah, but not much.
And the one you're sitting on is the same kind of chair.
Yes, it's the same.
Yeah. Well, obviously, Paul, you know, we had a sprung chair
We did.
in a consulting room we had, which was semi-reclining, but it was wood, a nice sprung wood frame, and we would use that to pick up ideomotor signals. We would notice them and say nothing, and then later we would say something to see if that triggered a vibrational response, like a tuning fork.
Yeah.
You've probably seen pictures of it. It's pink in color in the photographs of our consulting room. That was deliberate.
Interesting.
It's got the same form or the same shape as the chair that John is sitting on, but it with a lot more movement inbuilt.
You get whole body movement.
You would get, yes, you would. Yeah.
Yeah, and also because the weight was backwards and on the arms of the chair, people had their arms on the chair. The weight moves away from the arm, which allows the hands and arms to move and float more easily.
Yeah.
So the whole thing is perfect, really, for what we were looking for. But for a person, it just looks like a comfy chair. So, yeah, it's a kind of an ideomotor amplifier. And I'm not suggesting there's a complex there or any kind of conflict, but there will be other things that are processing in the background that will show unconsciously through that kind of thing. And if we work clinically, then that's an important thing to look for.
Well, you've broken the legs off a few chairs, haven't you?
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Yes, I
You
have.
have,
Yeah, I
but
have.
but
Yeah.
but I think that's you do have a kind of a dynamic energy that does not like to feel restricted, and sometimes you've been in conversation with people who have tried to close you down, and rather than open things up and out, and then that's got to go somewhere. So, you get the ideomotor response or reaction through the body because it's kind of superposition with the reducing kind of atmosphere that you find yourself in
Yeah.
or have found yourself in. It's been a very long time since that's happened. But
I know what you're talking about. Well,
but
Yeah.
but you do have, and you always have had, as long as I've known you, a lot of dynamic energy, a ballistic energy,
Yeah.
physically and mentally.
Yeah.
And if that's restrained, artificially, it's got to go somewhere.
Uh-huh.
And I think that's probably true, not just for yourself then or now, but for a lot of young men, because a lot of young men need to be physical. They have they're in the prime of physicality.
I haven't been a young man for a long time.
In spirit, you have. But you know what I'm saying.
I do know it.
Yeah.
Are you referring by chance to a certain Jungian course that we were
I
on?
think I might.
I thought you might do. Yeah. I took exception to.
You did, and rightly so, because
Yeah.
it was blooming awful.
It was awful. I told them so. This was in person.
Yeah. Yes, it was
And,
terrible. It was appalling, actually. So, how else do you deal with that in the moment? You know,
Sure.
you broke your chair. Yeah, you did. You did indeed.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Anyway,
Anyway, that's churn. Yeah.
that's also women. That's what they do to you. They draw out vulnerabilities in public and then thank you, Paul.
Oh, I think it's one of your strengths, actually, in many ways, because
Yeah.
I do.
Yeah. But it's also a whole body amplifier.
Yes, it is a whole
A
body.
chair like that.
Right,
And,
it is. Yeah.
I mean, I can keep perfectly still while
Oh,
I'm
of course
working.
you can, and you do.
And I can go long periods. There's no blinking reflex,
Oh, yes,
nothing.
Yeah.
So I have control over mostly over things like that.
Yes, of course you do. Of course. Yeah.
Oh well. There you go, John.
But it's just part of being self-aware, isn't it?
Yeah.
Really, as you say, and utilizing those signals, being aware of the signals you're giving off and utilizing them yourself.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I always sat in a rigid chair when we worked in this particular consulting room where in fact, we had that in several rooms,
Yes,
but
we
wherever we had it, I always sat in a rigid chair.
Yes.
It'd have a cushion underneath me for a little bit of comfort, but that would be relatively rigid. And the other person bouncing around everywhere because that gave me a lot of information.
Yeah.
And they weren't aware I was taking it on or in.
No, but as you said, it's a very different context.
Very different.
And the ability to be still in that context is really important.
It is. It is. It causes people either to look at you or to avoid looking at you, and you can make a decision on why that's happening. And also any movement you do make then is going to be picked up. So you then consciously direct your movement. That's sometimes, but other times it's very animated and move around a lot. So it just depends on how you read the field of the interaction that you're in.
Absolutely.
Yeah. But I would try that, John. I would actually try and sit in the chair and then see if something will reveal itself to you. And see where the associated chain goes. Like that. Yes. Always thank it, no matter what you get, even if it's nothing, because it's polite to do so.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks, John. Right. Would anybody else like to offer anything on this, or just bring a prompt up that we can develop? Not even Mladen? Surely Mladen's got something to say.
Yeah, nothing at this point, actually. I mean, all the things that were previously raised were kind of completed circles in a way, so didn't leave a lot for me to go into.
Oh, well, thank you. Thank you. So on the topic of instincts getting into conflict then between themselves, there are ways that this can happen, bearing in mind which of the two parts of the instinctive field, as we've described it in recent videos, are primary. So the neuropsychoanalysts only consider Panksepian emotional systems, which they also call instincts, which are actually drive states. They don't really consider them, but they need to have a scenario that they can couple with in the environment in order to be discharged. And if that's not there, that energy has to go somewhere else. But for the neuropsychoanalyst, the seeking system is that which seeks literally a scenario to bring the Panksepian drives into satiation, in other words, to be satisfied. And if there's a mismatch, because there's nothing here but that will do, then you see people acting uncharacteristically, shall we say, with the normal character or normal personality. And then people find that unusual. Perhaps it's even illegal, that kind of thing. And the poor person who suffered in that way doesn't know how or why they did what they did, but they did. And that can be a source, for example, of shame. Shame is a kind of Panksepian state that they don't, well, they do. They talk about guilt, don't they?
Yeah.
Yeah. But they talk about it in not a way I don't believe that understands it in a way that can heal it.
Mhm.
What I found is that shame happens when a person has lost some level of status. So they would bring play online to that and say, play is all about rehearsing status and interaction between peer groups and rank order, that kind of thing. That is true. But what they don't seem to emphasize is that shame and guilt, being pretty much the same thing, depends very much on whether what is felt is legitimate or not. Legitimate guilt can be sorted out very, very quickly. Society and cultures, they have ways of sorting that out. It's homeostatic for the group. But when a person suddenly believes that they should be ashamed of something or feel guilty about something that does not warrant that, is not something to be guilty over or shame, that is illegitimate, and you can never solve illegitimate guilt as if it is guilt, because it isn't. And that's the key, because at the Panksepian level, the Panksepian drive understands that it is not guilt and that it is not shame. So why am I feeling it? At that point, it's because a complex stepped in. At the moment, the person divided and decided that their interpretation of a situation warranted feeling shame or guilt. A complex split off and said, yes, it was, and you should feel that way. And I'm going to run around now, and any compensation for this, I'm going to take it and I'm going to throw it at you so you feel more of the drive state, more of the anxiety, etc. And you'll have to rely on me to protect you. And what will I say? I will say, for example, don't relate to people in that way. Don't expand your peer group. Don't wherever it might be. And there are developments on from that which are Adlerian, for example. So illegitimate guilt cannot be solved because it's not guilt. So we have to remove the thing that is interpreting it as such. That's the complex. And we do that in the way that I've been saying about dissociation. And then we allow the compensation to come through, which is invariably in such states, in my experience, a meta-instinctive scenario. But that scenario it has affect that is not negative. It's transformative. It's healing. Because suddenly the ego can see itself in the context that its original drive pressure was intended for it to experience. So legitimate guilt, you say you're sorry, you apologize, your peer group accepts you, or there's some sanction or punishment that lasts for a reasonable amount of time and then it's done with. And then you're accepted back into the rank order. That's the extent, broadly speaking, of legitimate guilt. Everybody makes mistakes. It's normal to do that. And in a world as complex as literally there's a human interaction, there's going to be lots of events like that, but there are going to be others where we receive either from the outside the impression of shame or guilt, which we feel illegitimately, or internally because something's interfering with it on the inside. And once a guilt complex forms and emits shame as its shell of protection to be seen into, it will then look for other examples of ongoing behavior or future anticipations, which it will insinuate to the ego and say, you can't do this or you can't risk that, collapse back into me. And that's the ongoing presence. As I was saying before, complexes have to be continually updated. They don't have anything of their own. They have to feed off other things. So while I've dealt with guilt complexes, I've dealt with many, many of them in the past. It's been to separate off legitimate from illegitimate, but not cognitively, experientially. The person needs to be dissociated from attachments to the complex's ideas and then feel the transformative affect which is trying to come through in a compensatory way. And at that moment, they can rebuild the ego without attachment to the complex. It's awful when people suffer like that. They get in terrible states and it can go on for years and years and years, and more and more is added to them. Each new experience adds to the apparent legitimacy of the previous ones. It's very, very debilitating. So it's something that can be exploited by a complex very, very easily. But the compensation for it exists, but it's silent. It's not getting through under normal conditions. So again, another principle is that an identified with complex will not want you to separate off from it. It wants you to pay attention and maintain it. That allows it to create havoc everywhere. Now, another problem, to go back to what we're speaking about today, is that when homeostasis apparently can't solve the problem because the ego is in such a stubborn, from its perspective, state of adherence to identification with a complex, its default setting on an evolutionary basis seems to be increase the pressure to push past the complex, to attempt to push past it. And what will happen then is that the instruction may be given to different instincts to simultaneously fire to attempt to get an angle on the complex and get past it. And once those instincts are released, those meta-instinctive scenarios by the genome to try and get past the guilt complex, then they will reach a point where they are not getting through. And rather than just simply disappear, they will start to say, I need some of your energy. You give me some of yours, you back off, and I will go. And the other instinct, meta-instinct, may agree or disagree, and then the meta-instincts get into conflict at that level. And that's fuel for the complex, or even for the generation of another complex. And it can get complicated there because the new complex and the original one can either agree or they can fight one another, and we can get more of a battle going on as well. So it seems awful, and it is, for a person who's suffering that way, but the key to solve it all is dissociation. Dissociation means disidentification. It means non-attachment. But typically, the person who suffers, they are very attached to that which is harming them. And the cognitive element is the last step, which is why correcting only that doesn't work most of the time. So where do we go? I've mentioned intuition, because intuition is field sentience of itself. If we go to intuition, we will get the answer, but not necessarily immediately, because of the nature of intuition. It's not collapsed, it's broadband. And therefore it may well configure a representation of our distress back to us. And we need to receive that without attachment. Because if we receive it with attachment, we've converted the healing intuitive pressure into something that the complex can utilize. It's so important to dissociate. And I said before, dissociation and representation. What intuition will give to us as a representation of the state that we are in, we have to be capable of receiving that without feeling anxiety, which is the drive pressure, then converting into a negative affect. So we're still dissociated, not attached, but receiving. We are receptive. Now, if we can do that, what will happen is that this first representation, say from intuition, which says this is the state that you are in, it's very tempting for cognition to say, I know that, don't state the effing obvious. If we do that, though, we're running contrary to the way that intuition works. We have to receive it. Why is that? Because for any compensation to work at any level within us as a field, the compensation must be received. So at a cognitive level, it has to be received. We can't brush it off or push it away at the cognitive level and then expect everything to just go along with the fact that we're being collapsed into cognition. So we receive it, however unpleasant it seems to be. We don't have to feel the effect. We can feel the representation. So we can receive the representation as an image. So intuition, sensing, affect, and then finally the meta instincts will kick in. The meta intuition, which will provide the transpersonal response that we really need for a complete remap of the ego's understanding of itself. But most people, unfortunately and very reasonably, don't have that experience behind them or those insights to understand how these meta qualia work. There is an order to them. The healing one is meta intuition, but meta intuition collapses initially into our own subjective intuition, which is the thing that moves everything around between the other meta qualia. But we have to entrain ourselves to receive that which is unpleasant as an image without attachment, non-attachment. And again, I'd go back to the East for this and how Tantric Buddhists deal with this kind of thing. They receive, but they're not affected. And by receiving, they have not suppressed and they have not repressed, both of which reinforce the complex. If we do the opposite to reinforcing the complex, we are weakening it. They understand that in their own terms, and in a practical sense, this is how it works when we work with dissociation and then representation. So that's important, is that to get the nuance of how that operates.
It's a completely different way of looking at things, isn't it? And as you say, it prevents the collapse into opposites, into polarities as well. It is a very Eastern thing, isn't it? To literally allow whatever it is in the background to come through in terms of compensation, and in whatever way it chooses to. There's always a temptation for the ego to want to interfere with that. And not only interfere with it, but try and interpret it too soon as well. So as you say, that's the first step, is to open up and to be receptive and to show appreciation too, just by a simple thank you on the inside for whatever it is that presents. And already we're moving in the right direction at that point.
Thanks, Paul. So when it comes to, I'll call it this, Erich Neuman's, even though it's an obvious statement, where there's a conflict of meta instincts that are legitimate, that's another angle that we need to potentially consider. Because they are on lifespan development timed release, they challenge us particularly at certain adaptive phases of our life. And it could be, depending on how the ego is configured, how it's learned. In other words, it's lifespan development trajectory, its timeline is configured in such a way that certain things have been achieved partially or completely and other things not at all. But there is urgency for a completion of one stage relative to another. That can put us under direct meta-instinctive pressure, superpositioned into the environment. This is particularly true with lifespan development, as I say. So the obvious ones are puberty, adolescence, and any of the life transitions that occur as we get older. And that can take us by surprise, because someone can be very adapted to the world in relationship to any complexes they have, but then suddenly something moves and there isn't an obvious split or complex that could be found, and the level of approach is better considered to be a conflict of meta instincts. And what we do then is exactly the same as we do with complexes. The dissociation of the ego, and then the communication with the representations of the expectation of the genome that we sort this out. And this is a dialectical process. And basically how you configure this cognitively is that you receive and respect the representations and what's behind them, which is the pure drive, and say, I will meet these requirements, or I will do the best I possibly can. You've told me what you want. I understand that at the level that I can with my cognition. But my role is to adapt to the outside world. And yet I also have a duty to receive from you the inner world. And your view is a little different, but I want to learn from that and adjust in such a way that I can meet as much of these needs that you have for me as I can. And when you do that at a cognitive level, then that will be recognized by that which is not cognitive. Even if we don't realize we're doing it, intuition will pick that up. The extension of the intuitive field is backwards. It will go back. It will pass through affect, pass through imagery, be received and processed on the inside as this ego personality understands what we're asking of it. But it's saying to us, in its judgments, which appears to be reasonable, because it's its job, I can't fulfill both or more of you completely at this time. But I will do my best to do that. I will adapt to the world. Now, if that's properly configured and we follow it, we'll pass through the affect and sensory field, imagistic fields ourselves. Remember, receive what comes, follow what goes when it comes to the inner world. And then there'll be a reaction to that, which will reduce pressure. And there'll be a superpositioning of consciousness between the ego and the non-ego, that there is agreement. That collapses, as I say, the drive pressure and removes the conflict of instincts. But if we choose to remain utterly unconscious, we leave no option for the instincts but to fight us and to compete amongst themselves, which means homeostasis is compromised and our capacity to adapt is collapsed accordingly. And then cognition starts to do what it does best, which is it just thinks and thinks around itself in a loop. And then the only intuition it can receive is negative. The positive intuition is there, but the negative is trying to compensate and say, look at the state you're in. Look what you're doing to yourself. And the cognitive metaqualius judges that as irrational pressure, and therefore it's anxiety, and then it generates the receptivity to negative affect. So this is really how homeostasis works through the metaqualia at different levels, and how we can actually use cognition to relax itself and be receptive enough to receive and then follow. As we follow, we then pick up the progress. Which again, in this specific instance, is very important. It's less important with conflict with a complex, because we don't necessarily want to go into the field of the complex. We want it to be separate from us. But in order to understand the meta instinct, we have to receive the impression of it, but also the affect as well, and the intuition that's connected with it. So that means we really need to follow them. So that's pretty much as a starting point, the infodynamics of this situation, isn't it?
Yeah, I think it's important too for people to realize that the inner world has an opinion on us. Because I think, again, from the ego's perspective, it's like that's all there is to know. So I think it helps to know that the inner world does have an opinion. Instincts have an opinion on us. And so to take that kind of reversed perspective on ourselves is a good starting point. I think we're more likely to be receptive to what comes through then. Because if you don't have a model that includes that perspective, you can't even really take the first step, can you? Because you just see whatever, or you just accept that what is outside of your ego awareness, it basically just doesn't exist. It's to all intents and purposes, not having any effect on us. But the minute that you accept that the inner world has an opinion, and it might be good if it shared it with us, with the ego, then things move. They really
They do
do.
very quickly.
Very, very quickly. Yes. Yeah.
People can literally change overnight.
Yes. Yeah.
And you would expect that capacity to exist in a wide field homeostasis because it has to regulate so many things. You see, I'm sure you've probably intuited this, that if Jungian active imagination were to work, this would how it would have to work in order to work. But built within it, there are problems which prevent it from working usually, and that is the reification of inner images to make them an equivalent cognitive state to the ego. So it's like having a conversation with a third person on the inside. And if you find yourself doing that, I would say you need to back off from it because you're not experiencing the non-ego as it wants to be experienced.
On its own terms.
On its own terms. And what will very rapidly happen is that you'll get a deep structure complex forming, which will prevent you from going any further. It will hold a mirror up, and the mirror confirms what we've said and what we believe, but we don't get any further. And then afterwards, it's like, well, I had this conversation with Philemon, like Jung did. What? You didn't. You did not. You're having an internal ego dialogue with a reflection of your own beliefs. You haven't received the damn thing. You've internally projected something which is now systematized homeostatically to stop you making any progress. And that's why you need to have another conversation with Philemon. Today, tomorrow, the day after, next week, you're going to have to keep doing it because that's what the Jungians tell you to do. But you're making no progress. Why are you making no progress? And it's because you've internally projected a reified image that you've borrowed out from the culture.
And probably Jung needed to do that to keep himself sane or to stop himself literally from going over the edge. So I think in his context is probably why he had to do that. But
That's very valid.
that must not be generalized across to other people.
No, that is very valid. I must say that because with someone who is on the edge of disintegration, you need an image of something which is integrated and that can carry that projection. And that actually is one of Jung's definitions of his self-archetype, is an organizing center and the transpersonal ego. And obviously he did say it'll turn up as abstract images, but it also turns up as, for him, Philemon, and other things like that. But so under specific circumstances to build some ego strength, then it's necessary. But if you are someone who is sufficiently regulated, you're balanced, adapted to the world, but you want to learn more, don't do that because you won't get anywhere.
Yeah. Well, arguably that may be why he didn't get as far as he should have done or could have done, because he was being stopped by his own psyche from going any further.
Yeah.
The main takeaway, I think, is to just not generalize that across from him. And yet, of course, people do all the time.
They do.
The Jungians certainly do. And anybody who's influenced by Jung may also think that that's the appropriate thing to do. It was right for him. It doesn't mean it's right for everybody else.
No. That's a good point because he drew mandalas, as you know, for years.
Yeah.
And there are Jungian people out there who draw them for years.
Yeah.
And yeah, he made it clear why and when he stopped.
Yeah.
And he stopped when he had a dream of Liverpool, city of Liverpool, as Liverpool as the pool of life. And people locally to us, if they know anything about Jung, they know that. And yet they're mistaking an outer place for an inner representation that did not mean that they were the same thing. So all these people in Liverpool who think, oh, Carl Jung dreamt about our city, and that's why we've got this image of him up on the wall and what he said underneath. When he had that dream, he stopped drawing mandalas. He'd got past that obsession, that repetition compulsion of having to draw these geometric shapes. So there's a lot embedded in that. We talked with Carl Jung about it, about that dream, because he knew we were from Liverpool. He visited Liverpool himself back in the 1960s. And it's not what local people think, and it is not the literal city. And when we used that for a video, that was really to make a statement to the mainstream Jungians, who are all elitists, that what they've missed about the meaning of what they should be doing is that they should be able to communicate with ordinary people. Otherwise, what they do is worthless. It's just a glorified fantasy, which is exactly why that video is created the way that it is. And I'm locking around on it, and I'm wearing clothes I wore when I was 15, that kind of thing, 15 and 16, like a regression back to being part of the collective that needs to receive things that will help others. But the actual dream in and of itself was putting an end to mandalas.
Yeah. The thing is, a lot of psychopomps turn up like that too, Steve. I know as you say, you would, you're having a little bit of fun with it and manipulating your own persona to some extent, which was done consciously. Obviously it was. But the point is that sometimes people like that, who may appear that way, will turn up in our lives.
Yeah.
And we'll learn something from them.
We will.
And that's far more important than X amount of years of analytical psychology practice or therapy. So we shouldn't mistake the messenger for the message as well either. That's important, because if it and some people did do that, they thought that you were being absolutely serious in the way that you were presenting yourself. But the challenge is, in a way, to see beyond that to what goes to the heart of the representation.
Yeah.
And obviously, you're from Liverpool, you understand the Liverpool people really well, and collectively they are warm, and they tend to accept people as they are. They're good at relating in that regard.
They don't care about your status.
No, they're not interested in class, status, anything like that at all. There's a lesson in that, and therefore there was a lesson in the video to do with that, about how you get on with ordinary people day to day in your everyday relating. And so it was an attempt to shift the center of gravity away from the kind of elite practice in Zurich, and then put it back into a context that actually means something.
Yeah.
Which is, it was to do with the heart of the city, the people who inhabit it, how they get on with one another, how they deal with everyday problems.
Yeah. Well, there was a website, wasn't it, at the time? It's probably still there.
Yeah.
It's basically called Breakfast at Kusnak.
That's right, yeah.
And that's why it opens the way that it does. So been there, done that. Screw up the paper and throw it in the waste paper basket. Been there, done that. We did that in the actual family home, on the personal invitation of Carl Jung's only son. We didn't go to some hotel or whatever in Kusnak, or the house when it was a museum. I mean, Franz, when he reached out back to us anyway, said the house of my father is not a museum. He made absolutely sure that we knew that. It is not a museum. It's a home. So that again was part of what went into there. So there's the and this is the point I'm gradually getting to. There's the representation of the video, which is contrived, but there's a deeper level which is not contrived but is real. And then there's something beyond even that, which motivates all of that happening. And we need to go through those layers to understand both why we did it and whatever impression it had on other people. Dreams are like that. All of the basic infodynamics that you can access, and they all are multi-layered as a field of representations. So, yeah. So what are the meta instincts involved in that? Well, as you're speaking, Paul, I mean, you went back through the fact that I'm from that city, and I know it, and I know, or it's
embedded in you.
Yeah, there's a deep impression, but there's something deeper than that, which is universal and collectively human.
Yeah.
To do with the absolute value of properly relating to people. And so if you want to help people, you have to.
Yeah.
And anything which is contradictory to that, I find unacceptable.
Yeah.
You know, to sit in Kusnacht and think of yourself as above everybody, you know, in the way that they do, when they can't even outperform a Rogerian counsellor or a CBT therapist. They can't even put a phobia right. They can't even do that level.
Yeah.
They are so inept but so inflated.
Yeah.
And yet there is so much in Jung's work. It's there, but you have to work it through real people because it's never brought into being. It's an abstraction. So that was the message of that. And with anything with anybody we work with and they produce something like that, which is a kind of a personal myth, you can get into what's motivating them and also where things can go wrong and be misdirected and where the suffering emerges out from as well. So representations of images are really important.
On how you relate to them, because as I say, so some people who watch that video saw certain things in it, and they couldn't get beyond what they thought they were seeing.
Yeah.
And so they could never receive the full.
It was quite funny, really.
Well, yes, it was. There was a humorous element to it.
Yeah.
But the point is that, you know, if you put off, you're distracted by the image for whatever reason, then, you know, you may not see, you know, Jung himself would have talked about, you know, the hidden gold in the situation.
Yeah.
You never get to it because you can't get past, in this case, the apparent persona or the manipulation of persona that was part of that video, and that you were running with a little bit in order to make a particular point.
Yeah.
But there was, you know, definitely a much deeper structure
Yeah.
message to it.
Yeah.
And some people just didn't get it at all. Other people,
Yeah.
I think it did hit held. But even the fact that we're here on the Wirral, you know, the wilderness of Wirral and all of that, which, you know, from both the perspective of Liverpool, you know, there's a river to cross in order to get to Liverpool. It's almost like the Wirral is a kind of a backwater, like a place
Yeah.
that is similar in a metaphorical sense to the inner world.
Well, the Welsh
The Welsh then,
regard it as that.
they do.
It's, without being too distracted.
Yes, of course.
It's a perfect peninsula with two huge river estuaries on either side. One river estuary is into what is now Wales, the other is into the city of Liverpool, and there's an awful lot of mythology in the ground, isn't it? And it's still treated that way by people, consciously or otherwise. But yeah. So it's a bardo, isn't it, really, I guess? But yeah. What do we do with imagery? More or less, as I was saying before, we need first to receive and then to be able to follow and not to project ahead. You shine the light in, it shines back. We speak, we receive an echo. But we haven't moved. Everything we give off is returned to us. That's stasis. Stasis is a feature of a neurosis too. A neurosis has to maintain its division to be a neurosis. Okay, of course, spoke a lot. Would anybody like to contribute, get involved on this one? In any way at all? John, you're moving again. Yeah, sorry about that. Shifting in your seat.
I was trying to be still, but
Okay, singing, my friend. Could you repeat?
I was trying to be still, but I moved a little bit, so
Yes, you did. Are you more comfortable now for moving? Yeah, there you go. See, so there's an opportunity for.
You've changed your chair, I think.
yes, I treat.
Yeah.
Yes.
That
But
was more comfortable.
it's more comfortable.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Now, I'm sure, just as an aside, as you're leaning on one side, the people will appreciate that when somebody moves like that and shifts more comfortably, when you suggest that they're more comfortable, that's part of the potential hypnotic induction. And the only reason it works is because there is a mind which is bigger and wider and other than the ego. The ego is aware of itself, less aware of its, say, it's shifting its posture or changing breathing, as John has just done, by the way. Then these are all things. Yes, that's right, John. Yeah, yeah. Nice confirming move of your shoulder. Yeah. And it may not be, but when you suggest that it is, then at least the person can check. And whilst they're busy checking, you can say something else. So these are just hints really about how to utilize spacing and leading on the fly.
Can I just say my breathing changed also when you said other and wider?
Really? Gosh. Yes. Oh. You're not out in the open, are you, at the moment?
At the moment, no, we're surrounded by cats. Ah,
Surrounded by instinct. Yeah.
indeed.
Oh. Thanks, Ryan. Thanks, Cassie.
Well, cats know how to be comfortable, don't they? That's for sure.
Oh, yes.
Well, they really know how to be comfortable.
Do-
Yeah.
Yeah.
We were, I was commenting yesterday to Cassie, when you were, well, no, we were talking to each other and we were we were listening to a video. That's what it was. One of your videos. And, it was discussed how dogs change state to become more comfortable after they've been outside and run around for a bit, become happier. But it seems to be the opposite with cats.
Yeah.
If we let our cats outside, they get more amped up. The longer they stay inside, the more comfortable they are, the happier they are. It's interesting.
I agree. Having had cats and dogs,
Oh,
I
yes.
definitely
Yes.
agree.
Yeah.
Yeah. They're all very different, aren't they, with their energy? Yeah.
So much.
Yep.
There's a lot we can learn from them.
Mm-hmm. Indeed. I learned how to take naps from these cats.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Mm.
It was actually very difficult for me before we had any.
We talk about cat naps, don't we? Use the expression last night.
Yeah.
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 And I wanted to mention also that one of my favorite parts of the Liverpool video was when you two were maybe making your way over to the ferry down the ramp, I think.
Oh, yeah.
Propelled down the ramp.
Indeed.
Oh. Yeah. Yeah, well, it's part of the extended mind, isn't it, for us? Because in fact, the first time I really got into discussing Jung and parapsychology with Pauline, she was 16, and she was halfway across the Mersey on the ferry, and I thought, I'll start to talk about weird things because there's no way out apart from jumping over going overboard. We are going to have to hear this if we're going to have a relationship that lasts. And so it's kind of part of that field for us, isn't it?
Yeah. Yeah. I haven't escaped it yet.
Did you feel like jumping overboard?
No, I don't. I'm not keen on being cold, and the Mersey is notoriously cold and inhospitable, isn't it? I was probably at that age more intrigued than anything else because it was so unusual.
Yeah.
Such an unusual way of seeing the world and captivating, really, for a very, very young woman to hear about those kinds of things. So,
Yeah.
yes, yeah,
Oh, well, it must have worked. Because he's still here.
yeah,
Oh,
yeah. But it is an interesting journey, literally, isn't it, across the Mersey?
it is. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, the ferry's been there for about 800-900 years, I think, and continuously. There's a priory, wasn't there? Birkenhead Old Priory, which used to have the right. It was granted to them by the king, wasn't it? It was kept, and It's passed over to civil authorities after that, but it's, yeah. It was a rowing-boat in those days with clubs,
Yeah.
and the monks
Yes.
had to pay the toll.
Been in rowing boats with all this.
You have? Yes, you have. It went round in circles. Never mind.
Yeah.
Never mind.
Metaphorically and literally, I assume. Rowing boats
Yeah.
in circles, yes.
Yeah, so a very inept rower. What kind of too much on one side. Oh, well, never mind. Thanks, guys.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, guys.
Thank you, Kath.
Okay, guys, so anybody like to open up anything on this discussion before we move on? Nope. So, meta instincts to get into conflict then. So we've been kind of talking about Freud and Jung, but not Adler particularly. And Adler's most well-known contribution is the polarity between the inferiority and superiority complexes, which for him were one thing, pretty much. Jung, when he did speak about them, tended to separate them and see them as polarized and in compensation for one another. That's a general sort of principle with Jung, of course. He does do that. But if we take a meta-instinctive perspective, then we could go back to the idea of loss of status. And what Adler showed was that early experiences to do with rank, it could be birth order. He was very interested in that. Or it could be, for example, that someone may be born with a physical disability, as he was, that generated feelings of inferiority in him. And then he began to find it in other people. This is what happens, of course, with psychological models, the collapse around the personality of the founder. It was the same with Freud, same with Jung, of course. But what you can see for sure is that issues of inferiority and its compensation, superiority and its compensation at heart are meta-instinctive. That's where the resolution is to be found. And again, to go back to what I was saying earlier about shame and guilt, because there is a close issue there. When you deal with the meta-instincts, then the Adlerian pathology to do with inferiority, superiority, that also disappears. Now, he said that you do it by having social interest and abstract it out, so it does become an abstraction, and then located in the culture, it appears to be all about that. It appears to be, what do I do in relating to others to overcome these feelings of inferiority that I've got that makes me, in compensation, act in a superior way, or the reverse, feelings of non-acceptance of my superiority, so I act in an inferior way. And he thought, just get on with people, basically, meet other people's needs, and you'll start to feel better. And functionally, that's good advice, I think. But what determines what is felt and understood by the genome to be proper adaptation to society is always a question of meta-instinctive scenario within which we find ourselves and we have a place. So someone who is highly competent but has never actualized that will very often act in, say, a work environment, might be an office, in an inferior way. But actually they're very, very competent, but they're afraid of being rejected by people seeing their competence. So that means that the meta-instinctive of the scenario that they are in has been misunderstood at a level that's produced a complex. That's what we would say. Adler would say that it's overcompensated superiority, overcompensated in the direction of producing subdominance and inferiority. And yeah, that explains it within level, but it doesn't really tell us where it comes from, why it's important. Now, what happens in such cases is that there are compensatory fantasies that are potentially the portal to reconfiguring the ego's understanding of itself and its predicament. But because they are fantasies, they are holding spaces, and that it's not actually accessing the transformative meta instinct. And this can persist for years once it's laid down. People can go right into middle life and beyond, habitually hiding their potential positively by appearing to be inept, stupid, slow, making mistakes everywhere, because they are getting confirmation for it at the Adlerian level of where he says the solution is, which is social interest. And that's where the trap is for someone who follows an exclusively Adlerian path. You have all the right ideas cognitively about what the solution means, but when it comes to relating to others, you can, in the case of a superiority complex, dumb yourself down to such an extent that you are overcompensating for the needs of others. So you have plenty of social interest, you have too much of it. And that's where that equation, if you like, the Adlerian one, doesn't work. And with an inferiority complex, then you have people who aren't up to relating, aren't up to bearing responsibility with others, but they attempt to aggressively dominate other people. Narcissists are usually like that. You could say that malignant narcissism is a form of Adlerian overcompensation. And in fact, people who specialize in, like Otto Kernberg, for example, who specialize in the study of narcissism, point out the latent inferiority, if you like, an inadequacy even, which is behind the presentation of a narcissist who is in a leadership position. So we look at it from the Otto Kernberg level, we can look at the Adlerian level. We would, because it is so pathological, look at it at the level of character before we made an assessment of, can this person change? So a malignant narcissist with an inferiority complex who acts in a superior way is far harder to change because it's a character issue than someone who may have been conditioned into not accepting their competence. But the downside of someone who will not accept their competence is that they will attempt to appropriate any help that they may receive or that someone may attempt to give to them by positive affirmation and confirmation of their potential. They will attempt to twist that to fit the complex. And they'll go to great lengths to do it. And it's infuriating at a personal level. If you're a family member and you're trying, and after a while you give up because why should you bother? You've got your own life to live. And then that is, of course, seen as a self-fulfilling prophecy of their complex, which is that, when you actually are worthless and incompetent. And then if that comes into therapy, it repeats itself and it amplifies itself up. So the person who has this superiority complex will do absolutely everything to get you to reject them. Whereas the narcissist will do absolutely everything to get you to admire them. And then to subsume yourself, your personality, and your life only to satiate them at a Pancepian level, because that's how they live their life. So with the I'm using the term malignant because that is the worst example that's recognized of being a narcissist. With a malignant narcissist, then there's almost nothing that you can do by way of bringing a meta instinct online that will compensate for them, because their character is disordered, probably genetically. So therefore its bandwidth potential for change is collapsed as such. It's very, very resistant to change. You can make change with some of them to some extent, and with a very few completely, but they are rare. With the other people, though, you're not dealing with a bad person, and that's what's frustrating. You're dealing with a very good person, but usually, invariably, actually, I would say it's a decent person who has been conditioned to reject themselves in order to confirm other people. That is to say, to not challenge them and their perspective. So then they start to defend the people who are hurting them, but at the same time they suffer from it, and they know they're suffering from being hurt by others. There's the neurosis. They're hurting me, but I defend them. And with such people, you need to progress in such a way that you receive this neurotic, Adler would call it a neurotic alibi. You would say it's private logic, private to them. Would say it's guiding fiction. This is his personal message, or her personal message says I must be this way because I am that way. So it fits Adlerian pathology in that respect perfectly. Except that the solution is not what he said, in our view, because it's been tried, it's been tested by the ego, and it's not done that. It's found the confirmation comes from the confirmation of the inferiority that doesn't actually exist at all for that person. So the dissociation of attachments to the self-image and the self-concept that's built up over years is important. And then what protects that? What keeps us in that state? It's the idea that other people are better than me. And even though I say they're hurting me, you cannot criticize them, therapist, because I will attack you if you do. So dissociation is about separating them off from that so they can experience themselves. And that can be quite a surprise because although they're aware of it in the background through intuition, it doesn't get through because the superiority complex is intercepting everything and converting it into what it agrees with and what maintains it. So again, you can see, I think particularly in this example, even more than the malignant narcissist, who's very difficult to help at all, that with people with a superiority complex, they need to be isolated from the complex and allowed to experience something which moves them because they're decent enough to receive that. And what will move most people is a transpersonal experience that involves doing good for others, but accepting of your own goodness. Most religions operate that way. Christianity does, Buddhism does, as clear examples. But, the way that they configure the explanation of it is different, but functionally, in terms of how it operates in the world, they're identical. There is something good and transpersonal that we can aspire to, that will agree with us being that way and will confirm us on the inside, and then we can receive confirmation from others equally. That's homeostasis. So we can say, yeah, that works, that optimizes, and then we can have the Adlerian goal of social interest. But if we just drive for social interest and we have a superiority complex, we're just going to make things worse. So we need to bring in experiences. Jung called them an original experience for that person, which is transpersonal, that reconfigures. Totally agree with him on that. But for such a person who's locked into a complex, they must be separated from it. And years of analysis of dreams is not going to do that. Because after a while, the dream analytical process becomes appropriated to the field of complexes. They understand the game, and they'll start then to acquire the theory and identify with the theory, and then in the case of the superiority complex, will fail according to the formula of the theory in order to confirm their own inferiority, which is the only thing they believe in to any great extent consciously. So we have to help them avoid that, and that means no lengthy analysis of anything, but experiences which move them into a different state that they can't deny, but one that does not involve anxiety as a drive state. Because for anybody, anxiety is a drive state, even if it's meaning to push past with something helpful, is that which maintains a neurosis, because the complex utilizes it and essentially redirects it to say, see, you're in a mess, only I can help you, even though you're suffering terribly. Without me, it will be worse. And your whole life is proof of this. Therefore, I have to exist. That's why they stubbornly defend it. Whereas with a malignant narcissist, you see the urgency for approval and confirmation, but eventually total control of the relationship with you. And there's no satiating a narcissist. None. Because they want more. Always want more. It's never enough from anyone. And that depletes them. So they have to keep doing it. They have to keep marshalling more and more. And eventually that means I'll steal your energy to fuel my narcissism. I will borrow that, steal it in effect, because I won't ask your permission, I'll just take it and then direct it at you to force you to feel inferior and dependent upon my confirmation for you to even exist. They are bad people by all measures, but not all narcissists are that bad. Some of them are narcissistic defensively because they've been wounded, and that's a different kettle of fish. I would go so far as to say they're not actually narcissists. They may get called it, but they're not. The capacity to transform and to heal and to become good is there, and you can see it. But with a malignant narcissist, it's totally absent. Very different things. So with Adlerian pathology, then, the meta instinct is that which will sort out whether a person is a narcissist or not. A true narcissist, for example. Not everybody who can be processed, if you like, through an Adlerian way of understanding things is narcissistic. But when it comes to power, the power principle, and feelings of inferiority or superiority, then you have those issues. But the meta instinct solves it because it puts into context what it means to have power, what it means to have rank, what it means to help others through your rank, what it means to give service to others, what it means to be a leader, what it means to be a follower, where everybody agrees on that because the best people are in the right places. That's homeostasis. That's how power and rank order should be actualized. So that's the Adlerian angle, one of the Adlerian angles on that.
So somebody say you've given the example mainly of somebody with a superiority complex. You could argue that in some situations, they actually need more power, more agency, more personal autonomy. So to have more power for somebody like that isn't necessarily pathological in the sense that and this is part of the trap, isn't it? Very often for people who have a superiority complex, that they will resist the idea of having more personal autonomy, more personal power, because they'll see that as being a negative. Whereas as you say, the malignant narcissist won't have a problem with that at all. But a decent person who is behaving in a compensatory way, in other words, they're not living up to their full potential, they're acting in it or behaving in an inferior way, essentially, paradoxically, actually requires more autonomy, more personal autonomy than perhaps they're getting within the context in which they find themselves. And as you say, that very commonly plays out in workplace scenarios, situations, doesn't it? And you find with somebody like that, if it simply isn't the right fit, as in they're kind of a square peg in a round hole, then shifting them into another workplace scenario or say even a training environment will actually bring their full potential online and start to resolve, the one-sided compensation really that they've been suffering from. So we see that a lot.
We do.
People in the right meta-instinctual context, people like that start to flower. They start to become themselves fully, whatever that means for them. But workplace scenarios are typical, aren't they, for this kind? These dynamics are played out so often in those scenarios. Very, very commonplace. And it tends to be the people with the superiority complexes that suffer the most in situations like that. Because they find it so difficult to bring their own potential online.
Thanks, Paul. Thank you. That, I think, leads us into the dare I call it, the gender-based instinctual conflicts and relating in that broader sense, both within biological sex and between biological sex, and how the ancestral psyche produces these meta-instinctive anticipations, and then culture at any one time shapes the expression of them, and the end gets in a mess in relationship to them. So obviously for women, there's an awful lot of meta-instinctual conflict
Yes, there is potentially. I guess the most obvious example is when women obviously have to address the issue of whether they want children or not. Um, that obviously that doesn't come from the ego. That's meta instinctual, and we know from our experience of women who get conflicted in this way that there is a biological tripwire in the sense that around the age of 28,
Yeah.
we start to see, if women haven't already had children, we start to see the biological push for them. And then if they are women who up until that time have maybe pursued a career path, then they feel conflicted between their care instinct, their desire to have children, to have a family, and their need to continue to develop themselves along a specific creative path or personal development path. So you see the conflict between the desire for children, the biological imperative to have children, but also the need to continue to develop themselves. And just I I I think for women collectively, and then this is an artifact to some degree of decades and decades of feminism in all its various iterations, that they still now, even in you know the 21st century, haven't resolved that for themselves, and it's because they are completely unconscious of their connection to their own biology. Everything is mediated through, as I think I said earlier, a top-down psychosocial perspective on things, and it doesn't get beyond that. So the conflict doesn't get resolved. It needs resolving at the biological, meta-instinctual level, and then they can come to some kind of conscious conscious awareness or agreement about how then to proceed. So it may be for a time they have to go with the push from biology for reproduction, whilst other things, maybe other instincts which might push them in another direction, have to be attenuated for a time. And I think there just has to be some conscious negotiation about how best to navigate that, because of course the implications for how they resolve it go beyond just their own homeostatic well-being. They affect the relationships, the psychosocial relationships they have with other people, and the broader context in which they exist. So while it might not seem relevant for men sometimes to think about these things, or to think about how women might be conflicted, it will absolutely have an effect on them whether they think about it or not, because if they are in relationship to women, they can't help but be affected by it.
Yeah. So that's any kind of relationship, including the mother-child relationship and
Yeah.
any kind of hierarchical or psychosocial interactions.
Yeah.
So it's the degree of consciousness and when it occurs, isn't it? Because we're talking about a relationship consciously to meta instincts and not to the psychosocial representation
Yeah.
as such, because
Yeah.
that includes things where people talk about instincts, but they've been moved by them rather than understand them,
Yes.
which is the difference, isn't it?
It's a huge difference.
Yeah.
Yes, it's the difference, like I said, about whether you have a conscious or
Yeah.
unconscious relationship to them. It's all the difference in the world.
Yeah.
Because otherwise, you are the move to the mover.
That's it, isn't
Yeah,
it? Yeah.
it is. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. And meta instincts, because when they trigger, they go anyway.
Yeah.
I mean, it's like we said in the recent one about trauma and individuation, we're moved by them without realizing we're being moved.
That's
But
right.
we could talk about being in the state
Yeah,
of being moved, but we don't understand the push.
that's right.
And that is so important, isn't it?
It's a very important nuance, because it can be the decision. It can be the difference between making the right kind of decision, and by that I mean the right kind of decision for homeostasis for that individual woman, but also for her extended context as well, because guessing it right is And we all, of course, as you said before, we all make mistakes, or sometimes we don't know about these things ahead of time. And so we find ourselves in situations and scenarios that we don't understand before we can do anything about it. But the more we can have a conscious connection, basically, women, this is, to instinct, the better. Because we're more likely to make informed choices about things, even if it means, that we have to say no to one meta instinct over another for a time. And that can be enough sometimes for the other instincts that might be pushing to say, okay, I will be satiated at some point, but just not right now.
Yeah.
But if you don't have that kind of relationship, you can't even approach the conflict with resolution in mind. You just kind of you're moved.
Yeah.
As I say, you're the move to the mover,
Yeah.
which is not the best place to be in.
And the complexes form downstream of that with
They
respect to the ego
They do.
in any kind of interaction,
Yes.
including with men.
Yes.
Whether the woman is an existing mother, she's got other kids or whatever, or downstream from that. And then in relationship to anticipating that, younger women who haven't reproduced, but that is still in the background and is moving them, isn't it?
It is.
And then everything that Jung attributes to the anima and the animus also falls in line with that, because they cannot operate, if they're even real, cannot operate outside of instinctive, meta-instinctive scenarios, because there's nothing for them. There's no narrative for the so-called anima and animus that is not anticipated by the genome, which again shows that the so-called archetypes are downstream of the things that really create them. That alone is hugely important, isn't it?
Yeah. Yes, it is, because if we it's a source of so much misery and unhappiness, isn't it, if we don't get these things right?
Yeah.
Both in terms of our interpersonal relationships as men and women, but also for the wider constellation of the family as well. When children do come along, how do we integrate them into a system that is already set up? Between, for argument's sake, if it's between a man and a woman, then obviously the better, more stable that system is, the more likely it is to be for any children that are brought into the world. So these are all considerations, aren't they?
Yeah.
But most of them go on at either a completely unconscious level or a semi-unconscious level, and never really get beyond that point. Now, I would probably just say, just speaking for women, for those women who maybe don't want to develop themselves in the way that some women might do, and by that I mean embark on a career path, they may be completely contained by the care instinct. So and you hear women say this kind of thing, all I ever wanted to be was a mother. I've never wanted anything else. It's the only thing I want, and I'm completely happy with that. And that's probably true. And so in that regard, they're less likely to become distressed about siding, if you like, with one meta instinct over another, because they are completely contained by it.
So
So to all intents and purposes, it's a stable system.
so the decision for that didn't come from the ego.
No.
There's something about the configuration of the genome
Yes.
for that woman
Yes.
at that time,
Yes.
which has released
Yes.
that, because that's been calculated algorithmically at the level of the genome as being the most adaptive position to take.
Yes.
Because from the perspective of the genome and the genome widely, we need reproduction.
But the more potential a woman has, the more likely she is to come into conflict with, competing meta instincts.
Yes. And then the complexes get budded off from the ego's response to that pressure. And also the response from the environment. So again, we could just simplify this in Freudian sense. The pleasure principle, I don't mean that we're giving children birth to show is pleasurable or anything like that, despite what I've said. That's Freudian, because that's the id, that's instinct for him, and that's the pleasure principle. And the reality principle for him is the outer world. That's just the way he configures it. And the conflict between those two inside the ego produces everything. And it does, but because there are other things contributing to it,
Yeah.
which his model doesn't take adequately into consideration, which includes the true nature of complexes and even the true nature of instincts. He goes so far with them, so the id can become the Panksepian drive easily enough, but the meta instincts aren't there. Now, having said that, to be really fair to him, before Jung, he talked about archaic heritage and about inherited patterns of behavior and adaptation, which presaged Jung's archetypal theory, didn't it? Yeah, but that's well known enough, I think, that happens. But the general run of what his theory approaches is the resolution of suffering at the level of the ego. By squaring those two principles, pleasure and reality. Functional. But it's not deep enough to bring about quick change, because Freudian psychoanalysis goes on for 10 or 15 years as well. I believe Mark Selms lives about 11 or 12 years in it, wasn't he? For example, and he's not at all bothered by that. It's his investment of his life force into that. But why should anybody be put through that if it's not necessary?
Yep.
Anything biological that takes that long to sort out is not going to help you survive, is it? It's not going to be favored by natural selection to put a chunk of your life aside for that. It will want adaptive change quickly. And that's a principle that we've held for a long time now, and it seems to work.
Yeah. Well, it's you're talking about Eastern traditions before. It's you could argue too that it's similar to some of the Adlerian principles as well. This idea of the karma of right action or action in the world. It's the antithesis of that, isn't it? It's stepping away from real life and into something else that doesn't move you on. So
Psychoanalysis.
Psychoanalysis, yes, that's what I'm talking about. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely.
So the engagement with life, the principle of being engaged with life, however you choose to do that, is really important.
Yeah. So guys, for therapy then, we should always consider, does this person suffer from a conflict of instincts? And that the complexes we're seeing is the perturbation of the extended ego field as the ego field becomes the complex field, and how that then bounces back into the middle number of immediate experience, the self-concept, which is our continuity of identity, and the focus of that, the self-image. All of those things can be disrupted primarily by a disturbance at the level of meta-instinctive conflict, which then generates complexes. So
Yes.
Yep.
Yeah. I think for women too, I think they get into difficulty sometimes when it's quite clear that they should kind of embrace the meta instinct, should kind of go with it rather than resist it because of complexes that are trying to interfere with that process. So, for example, even when they have children or they have very young children, kind of resisting the tendency towards immersing yourself in that meta-instinctual context can result in a lot of suffering. If you become antagonistic to it, because it's like, well, I'm not doing this now, I'm not fulfilling that side of my nature right now, therefore I'll resist it, helps to generate more complexes. It just increases the propensity for them. So probably navigate that's important.
Indeed, and that's what we were saying earlier
Yeah.
about how to communicate with meta instincts from a cognitive position
Yeah.
taken by an ego that is strong enough to dissociate but retain its core. So it says, I recognize that, and I recognize the other, and I will address this in the best possible way that I can.
Yeah.
It's that simple sometimes to reduce that drive pressure.
Yeah.
It's when we don't do that that they compete with one another
Yes.
to force us. But if we say, well, I'll do both,
Yes.
or maybe one of them isn't going to happen
Right now.
or at all,
Yes.
because there's another way I can live my life that would be fulfilling. And then another meta instinct will immediately step in and say, that's me. Therefore, I will support you in this. and then the homeostasis across the meta instincts as a whole will level out. But where you've got polarized opposition in particular, that is very reminiscent of at the instinctive level,
Yeah.
is very reminiscent of conflict between or within complexes. So although they always push. There's no need to necessarily accept them all. I mean, I've worked with
That's true.
quite a lot of gay women over the years who have felt the sudden pressure to want to reproduce,
Yeah.
and not artificially, but they start by having the occasional fantasy about having biological, reproductively orientated sex with a man. Which is like, this is an intrusive fantasy. This is the kind of thing that generates Freudian problems in anyone, including in heteronormative people. This kind of weird intrusion of a sexualized fantasy, but really it's biology. And I've helped them to understand that that's all it is, but it is important. The main thing is that they come to some understanding of their nature and either finding another solution that doesn't involve a man, or accepting there are other things in their life that they can develop. That's an extreme example of a collision between the reproductive meta instinct and other instincts. So it's a question of balance between the competing forces. But if you can, where there's polarized meta instincts, if you can bring a third one in or more, that would be interested in helping to confirm the authenticity of a lived life, then that will satisfy.
Mm.
And that's a good thing. Okay, guys, I think better stop the monologue there. We've got, what, 15 minutes left, so we can have some kind of a debrief if anybody wants one that we can disinclude and anything that goes online. That will be fine. Sorry about the monologue. It's a bit overwhelming, isn't it?
It can often be helpful to hear again things that you've said in the past, because sometimes it's like when you go back and read a book again, because even though when you speak, it's usually always different. The way that you say what you say, it reveals things in a new way.
Thank you.
Slightly different every time, isn't it? So
Yeah.
as you rightly point out, sometimes you hear depending on how you're feeling on any particular day, you might just hear something slightly differently, and the light goes on, and it's helpful. That does happen.
It does happen. That happened. Somebody reached out, didn't it, this morning, that the life's changed and it was catastrophic for them, really, wasn't it? The stability of a relationship.
Yes.
They're on the other side of the world, but the light went on. That they were the exact words used, and it's just
Yeah.
a fortuitous turn of
Yes.
phrase.
Yeah, that's right.
And that's great. All the resources for change emerged in them and could not be located in us, which is the right way to treat it, I think.
Yes. Yes, it is. Yeah.
The victory is theirs.
And for women can have it all, I would say, just not all at the same time necessarily. And again, that's a way of approaching meta instincts, because it's not shutting the door on anything. It keeps things fluid. And sometimes it is, it's possible to maintain your own creativity in some way, shape, or form and still have very young children. It's not impossible.
No.
It just so much depends, I think, on women particularly are culturalized into thinking in a particular way of compartmentalizing things. And if they're feeling stressed or under pressure from other meta instincts, it's like, well, what does the culture say? The culture says, put your children in daycare, send them to somebody else. You must have, you must have a break from them because you won't cope otherwise. I mean, women are incredibly resilient, really. More than they give themselves credit for sometimes. And
more than the culture allows them to believe.
Well, yes, absolutely. Of course, that's absolutely true. And so if we don't make an assessment of ourselves by way of the culture, if that is kind of irrelevant to how we conceive of ourselves, then we can be free of it. And then we are able to get the perspective that we were talking about earlier, Steve, which is an inner one. What does the inner world want or need right now? What does it think of me right now? Well, what is appropriate for now? And then you can get a true perspective on things that's likely to be healthy for you in your given context. Otherwise, all you ever get is collective advice about things, which is very likely to be injurious, if anything. I mean, it may hit home in the right way occasionally, but it's not the same as being informed from within about what to do next. And that's true for whether you're a man or a woman, isn't it, really?
Yeah.
So that's following that kind of inner guide is far more important than anything that the culture might suggest we need.
Yeah.
I was just thinking the words, the wisdom of the ancestral psyche can't be beat.
Yeah.
Yes. Yeah. But again, I think you have to have a biological perspective. You certainly have to have an evolutionary perspective, to even allow that in, for that to be part of how you assess things. And if you refer dogmatically to the culture all the time, which by and large will collapse things into gender, and sort of inane things like sort of the distribution of tasks between couples, that kind of thing, the division of labor. It's at such a low register, isn't it, of understanding of something which is so much more complex. It can't ever deliver for you fully in terms of meaning. So just on the basis of that I think that women particularly should at least be suspect of it, if not in fact rejecting of it, because it doesn't resolve the meta-instinctual context
No.
ever.
No.